What happens when an unarmed intelligence officer finds herself face to face with five of America's most elite warriors in a situation that could end her career, her mission, and, possibly, her life? The answer lies in a classified operation that took place in the mountains of Afghanistan, where Staff Sergeant Maria Santos proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't made of steel and gunpowder, but of courage, intelligence, and an unbreakable will to succeed. This is the true story of how one woman's split-second decision in the face of overwhelming odds not only saved a critical mission but earned the respect of the military's most elite unit. What happened in those tense moments would be talked about in hushed tones in Pentagon corridors for years to come, and would forever change how the military viewed the role of intelligence officers in active combat zones. The story begins with what should have been a routine intelligence-gathering mission in the rugged terrain of eastern Afghanistan, but quickly spiraled into something no one could have anticipated. Maria Santos was about to discover that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with weapons, but with words, wisdom, and the kind of mental toughness that can't be taught in any training manual. Get ready to discover how a single moment of courage can change the course of military history, and why five of America's most feared warriors walked away from this encounter with a newfound respect for the power of an unarmed mind. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her radio headset as the Black Hawk helicopter descended toward the landing zone in the remote mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The October wind whipped through the open doors, carrying the scent of dust and pine from the rugged terrain below. At 28 years old, Maria had already completed 2 tours of duty as an intelligence analyst, but this mission was different. For the first time, she was going into the field without the usual complement of armed escorts. The mission briefing had been clear but troubling. Intelligence reports suggested that a high-value target, Taliban commander Khalil Ahmad, was operating from a compound deep in the mountains near the Pakistan border. What made this operation unique was that Ahmad had specifically requested to meet with an unarmed American intelligence officer. He claimed to have critical information about an imminent terrorist attack on American soil, but he would only share it with someone who came without weapons as a sign of good faith. Maria checked her equipment one final time. Her backpack contained sophisticated communication gear, a portable satellite uplink, water, and emergency medical supplies. Notably absent was any form of weapon. She had argued against this condition during the planning phase, but her commanding officers had overruled her objections. The intelligence Ahmad claimed to possess was simply too valuable to ignore, even if it meant sending an unarmed soldier into hostile territory. The helicopter touched down in a clearing surrounded by towering peaks and dense forest. Maria grabbed her pack and jumped out, immediately feeling the thin mountain air in her lungs. The pilot shouted over the rotor noise that he would return to extract her in exactly 6 hours at the same location. As the Black Hawk lifted off and disappeared over the ridge, Maria found herself alone in the wilderness with nothing but her training and her wits. The hike to the meeting point would take approximately 2 hours through challenging mountain terrain. Maria consulted her GPS device and compass, then set off along a narrow goat path that wound its way up the mountainside. The silence was profound after the noise of the helicopter, broken only by the crunch of her boots on loose stones and the distant cry of eagles circling overhead. As she climbed, Maria mentally reviewed everything she knew about Khalil Ahmad. Intelligence files described him as a former Afghan army officer who had defected to the Taliban after the American invasion in 2001. Unlike many Taliban commanders who relied primarily on guerrilla tactics and roadside bombs, Ahmad was known for his intelligence network and his ability to gather information from sources across the region. If he truly had intelligence about a planned attack on American soil, it could save countless lives. The path became steeper as Maria climbed higher into the mountains. Her physical training served her well, but the thin air and heavy pack made the going slow and demanding. She stopped frequently to check her position and scan the surrounding terrain for any signs of movement. The mountains seemed empty of human presence, but Maria knew that appearances could be deceiving in this part of the world. After an hour of steady climbing, Maria reached a plateau where she could see for miles in every direction. The view was breathtaking, with snow-capped peaks stretching to the horizon and deep valleys carved by ancient glaciers. But Maria's attention wasn't on the scenery. Her trained eye was searching for potential threats, escape routes, and defensive positions. Even without weapons, her military training had taught her to constantly assess her tactical situation. She noticed movement on a distant ridge and stopped to observe it through her binoculars. A small group of figures was making its way along a parallel path about 2 miles away. Maria couldn't determine if they were hostile, but their presence reminded her that she was far from alone in these mountains. She made a note of their position and continued on her way, staying alert for any signs that she was being watched or followed. The meeting point was a small cave system that had been used by smugglers and guerrilla fighters for centuries. Intelligence reports indicated that Ahmad had been using it as a temporary base for the past several weeks. As Maria approached the area, she became increasingly cautious, moving slowly and staying low to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. The cave entrance was hidden behind a cluster of large boulders and was nearly invisible from more than 50 yards away. Maria studied the approaches carefully before moving in. She could see no guards or sentries, but that didn't necessarily mean they weren't there. Afghan fighters were masters of camouflage and concealment, and she might be walking into an elaborate ambush without knowing it. As she reached the final approach to the cave, Maria heard voices speaking in hushed tones. The language was English, not Pashto or Dari as she had expected. She froze behind a large rock and strained to listen. The voices were definitely American, and, from the tone and terminology, they sounded military. This was not part of the plan, and Maria felt her heart rate increase as she realized that the situation was becoming far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. Moving carefully to get a better view, Maria crawled to the edge of the boulder field and peered toward the cave entrance. What she saw made her blood run cold. 5 men in full combat gear were positioned around the cave system, and, from their equipment and tactical positioning, she could tell immediately that these were Special Operations Forces. Their weapons were trained on the cave entrance, and they appeared to be preparing for an assault. Maria's mind raced as she tried to understand what was happening. Had there been a miscommunication? Was this a parallel operation that hadn't been coordinated with her mission? Or worse, had Ahmad been captured and was this now a trap designed to capture her as well? She checked her radio, but the thick stone of the mountains was interfering with her signal. She was on her own, without weapons, facing 5 heavily armed Special Operations soldiers who might not know she was supposed to be here. The lead soldier, who appeared to be the team leader, made hand signals to his teammates. From her position, Maria could see him clearly enough to notice the distinctive trident pin on his uniform. These weren't just any Special Operations Forces, they were Navy SEALs. The most elite fighting unit in the American military was about to assault the exact location where she was supposed to conduct her intelligence meeting. Maria realized she had to make a decision quickly. She could retreat and try to reach her extraction point early, but that would mean losing the intelligence that could prevent a terrorist attack. She could try to circle around and approach from a different direction, but the SEALs would almost certainly detect her movement. Or she could reveal herself and try to explain the situation, hoping that they would believe her story and not treat her as a threat. The decision was made for her when one of the SEALs spotted movement in her direction. She saw him tap his team leader's shoulder and point directly at her hiding position. In seconds, all 5 weapons would be trained on her location, and she would find herself at the center of a potential friendly fire incident that could end her career and her life. Maria took a deep breath and slowly stood up from behind the boulder, raising her hands high above her head. As expected, all 5 SEAL team members immediately swung their weapons in her direction, their laser sights creating red dots on her chest and forehead. The team leader barked a sharp command for her to identify herself, and Maria found herself face to face with 5 of America's most lethal warriors, completely unarmed and with no way to immediately prove that she was supposed to be there. This was the moment that would define not only her mission, but her entire military career. What happened next would either result in a successful intelligence operation and mutual respect between elite units, or it would end in disaster that could compromise national security and cost lives on both sides. Maria Santos was about to discover that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with courage, intelligence, and the ability to think clearly under the most extreme pressure imaginable. The red laser dots remained steady on Maria's chest as she stood motionless with her hands raised high above her head. The SEAL team leader, a muscular man in his early 30s with cold blue eyes, kept his rifle trained on her while speaking into his throat microphone. Maria could hear fragments of his communication, but the tactical radio chatter was too quiet and coded for her to understand completely. "Command, this is Neptune 6, the team leader spoke quietly but firmly. "We have an unknown female subject at the target location. American uniform, no visible weapons, requesting immediate identity verification." He paused, listening to his earpiece, then continued. "Negative, this location was supposed to be clear of all friendly forces." Maria's heart pounded as she realized the full scope of the miscommunication that had occurred. The SEALs had received orders for their operation that apparently made no mention of her presence or her mission. From their perspective, she was an unexplained variable that could compromise their operation or pose a security threat. The fact that she was unarmed and in American military uniform actually made the situation more suspicious, not less. The team leader gestured for two of his men to flank Maria's position while keeping their weapons trained on her. These men moved with the fluid precision that came from years of training and combat experience. Their movements were so coordinated that they seemed to communicate through telepathy, each knowing exactly where the others would be at every moment. "Ma'am, I need you to state your name, rank, and unit," the team leader called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I also need you to explain why you're at this location at this time." Maria took a careful breath before responding, knowing that her next words could determine whether this situation escalated or de-escalated. "Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, Military Intelligence, 525th Battlefield Surveillance Brigade," she called back clearly. "I'm here on an authorized intelligence gathering mission, operation classified under National Security Act provisions." The team leader's expression didn't change, but Maria noticed that he exchanged glances with his teammates. The mention of classification levels and specific military units was encouraging. It suggested that she actually was who she claimed to be rather than an enemy combatant with stolen equipment. However, it also raised new questions about why their operations hadn't been coordinated. "Staff Sergeant, I'm going to need more than that," the SEAL responded. "This area is designated as hostile territory under active Special Operations Control. No other American forces were supposed to be operating in this sector for the next 72 hours. Maria felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool mountain air. She was caught between competing security requirements. She needed to provide enough information to convince the SEALs that she belonged here, but she couldn't reveal operational details that might compromise either mission if enemy forces were monitoring their communications. "Sir, I understand your position," Maria replied carefully. "My orders came directly from Joint Special Operations Command with priority authentication. I'm authorized to be here, but I cannot discuss operational details without proper security protocols and verification procedures." This answer seemed to intrigue the team leader rather than satisfy him. JSOC authorization carried significant weight in the special operations community, but it also raised questions about why such a high-level command would send an unarmed intelligence officer into a combat zone without coordinating with other units in the area. One of the flanking SEALs spoke quietly into his radio, apparently running some kind of verification check on Maria's identity and unit assignment. The technology available to special operations forces allowed them to access military databases even from remote locations, but the process would take several minutes to complete. During this tense waiting period, Maria became aware of sounds coming from inside the cave system behind the SEALs. Voices were speaking in what sounded like Pashto, and there was movement suggesting that multiple people were inside. This confirmed that Khalil Ahmad and his associates were indeed at the location as planned, but it also meant that the SEALs were preparing to assault a position that contained Maria's intelligence contact. "Sir," Maria called out, deciding that she needed to risk revealing more information. "There are friendly contacts inside that cave system. They're expecting to meet with American intelligence personnel. If you assault that position, you could be compromising a critical intelligence operation." The team leader's eyes narrowed as he processed this information. The idea that there were friendly contacts in what they had been told was a Taliban stronghold directly contradicted their mission briefing. Either Maria was lying to protect enemy combatants, or there had been a serious breakdown in intelligence coordination between different military units. "Staff Sergeant," the SEAL replied, his voice taking on a harder edge, "our intelligence indicates that this cave system is being used by high-value Taliban targets." We have authorization to engage and neutralize any hostile forces at this location. Maria felt her stomach drop as she realized the full implications of the situation. The SEALs had been sent to eliminate the same people she was supposed to meet with. Ahmed's offer to provide intelligence about terrorist attacks had apparently been interpreted by some military planners as a trap or deception, leading to the decision to launch a direct assault instead of pursuing diplomatic contact. The sound of movement from inside the cave was becoming more pronounced, and Maria could hear what sounded like people preparing defensive positions. Ahmad and his men had undoubtedly heard the voices outside and were preparing for an attack. Within minutes, this mountainside could erupt into a firefight that would destroy any chance of obtaining the intelligence that could prevent terrorist attacks on American soil. "Sir, with respect, I believe there's been a serious miscommunication," Maria said, her voice remaining steady despite the gravity of the situation. "The individuals in that cave have specifically requested a meeting with American intelligence to provide information about planned attacks against U.S. targets. They're not hostile, they're potential assets." The team leader listened to something in his earpiece, then looked back at Maria with an expression that mixed skepticism with growing concern. The verification check on her identity was apparently coming back positive, which meant she really was an American intelligence officer operating under legitimate orders. This raised serious questions about why two different military units had been given conflicting missions for the same target. "Staff Sergeant Santos," the SEAL said after a long pause, "I've confirmed your identity and unit assignment. However, our mission orders explicitly state that this location contains enemy combatants planning attacks on American forces. We have shoot-to-kill authorization for anyone found at this position." Maria realized that she was witnessing the kind of intelligence failure that could have catastrophic consequences. Somewhere in the chain of command, critical information had been lost, misinterpreted, or deliberately withheld. The result was two American military units operating at cross purposes, with the potential for friendly casualties and the loss of vital intelligence. The voices from inside the cave were becoming more agitated, and Maria could hear the distinctive sound of weapons being readied. Ahmad and his men were preparing for a battle they couldn't win against 5 Navy SEALs. If the situation couldn't be resolved quickly, everyone inside that cave would be dead within minutes, taking their intelligence about terrorist plots with them to their graves. "Sir, I'm requesting permission to approach the cave and attempt to establish communication with the contacts inside," Maria said, knowing that she was asking the SEALs to trust her with their lives as well as her own. "If they are hostile, you'll still have your tactical advantage and can neutralize the threat. But, if they're legitimate intelligence sources, we could prevent a major terrorist attack." The team leader considered this proposal while monitoring his communications. Maria could see him weighing the risks and benefits of allowing an unarmed intelligence officer to walk into what might be a Taliban stronghold. From his perspective, he would be responsible for her safety as well as the success of his own mission. After what felt like an eternity but was probably less than a minute, the SEAL made his decision. "Negative, Staff Sergeant. The risk is too high, and our orders are clear. We're going to proceed with the assault in 60 seconds. I'm ordering you to withdraw to a safe distance immediately." Maria felt her heart racing as she realized that her entire mission was about to collapse. In 60 seconds, 5 of America's most elite warriors would storm that cave and eliminate everyone inside. Any intelligence about terrorist attacks would die with them, and she would return to base with nothing but a story about failed coordination and missed opportunities. But, as she looked at the determined faces of the SEALs preparing for their assault, Maria made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She was not going to let this opportunity slip away without a fight. If she couldn't convince them with words alone, she would have to demonstrate her commitment in a way that even the most elite soldiers would respect and understand. What happened next would either result in court-martial proceedings and the end of her military service, or it would earn her a place in Special Operations legend as the intelligence officer who faced down 5 Navy SEALs without firing a shot. Instead of withdrawing as ordered, Maria Santos took a step forward toward the cave entrance. The laser sights immediately tracked her movement, and she could hear the sharp intake of breath from the SEAL team as they realized she was not following the team leader's direct command. "Staff Sergeant, stop immediately," the team leader barked, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of a combat veteran who expected instant obedience. that's a direct order. Withdraw to safe distance now. Maria stopped but did not retreat. She kept her hands visible and raised, but her voice carried a conviction that surprised even herself. Sir, with respect, I cannot comply with that order. My mission takes precedence, and I have intelligence indicating that the assault will result in the loss of critical national security information. The tension in the air became almost tangible as 5 elite warriors found themselves in an unprecedented situation. They were trained to handle enemy combatants, hostile civilians, and complex tactical scenarios, but none of their training had prepared them for dealing with an unarmed American intelligence officer who was refusing to follow direct orders in a combat zone. The team leader's finger moved closer to his trigger as he spoke into his throat microphone again. Command, this is Neptune 6. We have a situation developing. American intelligence officer is refusing to comply with safety orders and is interfering with mission execution. Requesting immediate guidance on rules of engagement. Maria could only imagine the confusion that was erupting at the command center as officers tried to understand how 2 separate missions had collided in such spectacular fashion. But she couldn't wait for bureaucratic solutions. Every second that passed increased the likelihood that the people inside the cave would decide that negotiations had failed and the battle was about to begin. Gentlemen, Maria called out, addressing all 5 SEALs directly, I'm going to walk toward that cave entrance now. I'm going to call out in Pashto and identify myself to the people inside. If they are hostile, they'll shoot me, and you'll have clear justification to proceed with your assault. If they're not hostile, I'll establish communication and we can resolve this situation without unnecessary casualties. The youngest member of the SEAL team, who couldn't have been more than 25 years old, shifted nervously and looked to his team leader for guidance. This was clearly outside the scope of any training scenario he had experienced. The other team members maintained their professional composure, but Maria could see the uncertainty in their eyes. Staff Sergeant Santos, the team leader said, his voice taking on a different tone that suggested genuine concern rather than just military authority, what you're proposing is suicide. If those are enemy combatants in that cave, you'll be walking into a kill zone with no protection and no backup. I cannot allow you to do that. Maria met his eyes directly, and, for a moment the formal military hierarchy seemed to dissolve into a conversation between 2 professionals who understood the stakes involved. Sir, if those people wanted to kill Americans, they would have already opened fire when they heard our voices. The fact that they're staying inside and haven't engaged suggests that they're waiting for something, specifically, they're waiting for me. This observation seemed to give the SEAL team leader pause. His tactical training had taught him to read enemy behavior and intentions, and Maria's analysis was tactically sound. If the cave contained hostile fighters, they would have either fled or engaged by now. The fact that they were remaining in position and had not initiated combat did suggest that they might be waiting for some kind of contact. The radio chatter in the team leader's earpiece became more intense, and Maria could see him listening to what was apparently a heated discussion between various levels of command. The situation had clearly escalated well beyond the local tactical level and was now involving senior officers who were trying to understand how such a massive coordination failure had occurred. Sir, Maria continued, pressing what she hoped might be an advantage, I've been studying Khalil Ahmad's behavioral patterns for 6 months. Everything in his psychological profile suggests that he's a pragmatist, not a fanatic. He reached out through back channels specifically because he wants to negotiate, not fight. If you assault that position, you'll be playing right into the hands of the real terrorists who want to prevent this intelligence exchange. The mention of specific names and psychological profiles seemed to resonate with the SEALs. This was the kind of detailed intelligence work that supported their own operations, and Maria's knowledge of the subject demonstrated that she wasn't just a bureaucrat who had wandered into a combat zone by mistake. From inside the cave, a voice called out in accented English, "American friends, why do you wait? We hear many voices but see no one. Are you well? Do you need assistance?" The voice was older, calm, and carried the tone of someone who was concerned rather than threatening. This was not the voice of a Taliban commander preparing for battle, it was the voice of someone who was genuinely worried that something had gone wrong with a planned meeting. The SEAL team leader held up his hand for silence and listened carefully to the voice from the cave. His tactical training had taught him to analyze vocal patterns and emotional states, and what he was hearing did not match the profile of enemy combatants preparing for combat. "Ahmad?" Maria called out in response, speaking loudly enough to be heard inside the cave. "This is Staff Sergeant Santos. There has been some confusion with our security arrangements. Are you and your men safe?" Yes, we are well," came the reply. "But why do we hear so many voices? You were to come alone, as we agreed. Have you brought soldiers to arrest us?" Maria turned to look at the SEAL team leader, hoping that he was beginning to understand the true nature of the situation. "Sir, that's not the voice of someone planning an ambush. That's someone who's confused and concerned about why there are extra people here. He's worried that I've violated our agreement by bringing armed backup." The team leader was clearly struggling with a decision that had no clear precedent in his training or experience. His mission orders were explicit: eliminate all hostile forces at this location. But the evidence was mounting that the people inside the cave might not be hostile forces at all, but rather intelligence assets whose elimination would compromise national security. His radio crackled again with urgent communications from command, and Maria could see him listening to what were apparently conflicting instructions from different levels of the military hierarchy. The situation had become a perfect example of what happened when different military branches and intelligence agencies failed to coordinate their activities effectively. "Staff Sergeant," the SEAL finally said, "I'm going to give you 5 minutes to establish contact and determine the nature of the threat inside that cave. But I want you to understand that my men will have clear fields of fire on your position at all times. If this is a trap, or if you're taken hostage, we will respond with immediate and overwhelming force." Maria felt a surge of relief mixed with renewed determination. 5 minutes wasn't much time to resolve such a complex situation, but it was better than watching helplessly as a potential intelligence goldmine was destroyed by friendly fire. "Ahmad," she called out toward the cave, "I'm coming to the entrance now. Please remain inside and keep your weapons secured. We need to talk, but there are some security concerns that we need to address first." As Maria began walking toward the cave entrance, she could feel the weight of 10 eyes watching her every step. 5 Navy SEALs had their weapons trained on the entrance, ready to provide covering fire if necessary, while an unknown number of Afghan fighters waited inside with their own weapons and their own concerns about the unexpected complexity of the situation. Each step she took brought her closer to a moment that could either result in a breakthrough in counterterrorism intelligence or a firefight that would echo through the mountains and destroy any chance of preventing future terrorist attacks. Maria Santos was about to discover whether her analysis of the situation was correct, or whether she was walking into a trap that would cost her life and potentially compromise the safety of 5 of America's most elite warriors. The cave entrance loomed ahead, dark and mysterious, holding secrets that could save countless American lives or end her career in the most spectacular failure imaginable. What waited inside would test every aspect of her training, her judgment, and her courage. Maria approached the cave entrance with measured steps, her heart pounding but her mind clear and focused. The opening was larger than it had appeared from a distance, carved naturally from the limestone by centuries of water erosion. Ancient petroglyphs were visible on the stone walls, suggesting that this place had been used by travelers and traders for thousands of years. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light inside the cave, Maria could make out 3 figures sitting around a small camp stove. They were older than she had expected, men in their 40s and 50s with weathered faces and traditional Afghan clothing. None of them appeared to be holding weapons, though Maria's training reminded her that appearances could be deceiving in this part of the world. The man who rose to greet her matched the photographs she had studied of Khalil Ahmad. He was tall and lean with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her appearance and demeanor. His English was accented but fluent, and his manner suggested education and sophistication rather than the rough pragmatism she associated with most Taliban commanders. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Ahmad said with a slight bow of respect, "you are welcome in our temporary home. But I must ask, why do we hear many voices outside? Our agreement was that you would come alone, without weapons or guards. Have your commanders decided they cannot trust us after all?" Maria remained standing near the entrance, conscious that the SEAL team needed to maintain visual contact with her position. She could feel the tension radiating from both directions, the SEALs outside who were prepared for combat, and the Afghans inside who were becoming increasingly nervous about the unexpected complexity of the situation. Ahmad, she replied carefully, there has been a miscommunication within our command structure. Other American forces received orders to conduct operations in this area without being informed of our meeting. They believe you and your men pose a threat to American interests. Ahmad's expression darkened with concern, and he exchanged rapid words in Pashto with his two companions. Maria's basic understanding of the language allowed her to catch fragments of their conversation. They were discussing whether this was a betrayal or an honest mistake, and whether they should flee immediately or attempt to resolve the situation. This is most troubling, Ahmad said, switching back to English. If your soldiers believe we are enemies, then we are all in great danger. My men are armed, as any prudent person would be in these mountains, but we have no desire to fight American forces. Such a battle would serve only our mutual enemies. Maria nodded, appreciating both his honesty about being armed and his clear understanding of the broader strategic implications. This was exactly the kind of pragmatic thinking that her psychological profile had suggested, and it reinforced her belief that he was genuinely interested in cooperation rather than confrontation. Ahmad, I need to ask you directly, Maria said, knowing that time was running short. The intelligence you claim to have about planned attacks on American targets, is it real? And are you genuinely willing to share it with us? The former Afghan army officer studied her face for a long moment before responding. Staff Sergeant, I have 3 sons living in America now. They came as refugees after I helped your forces in the early years of this war. The oldest is studying engineering at your University of Michigan. The youngest just started high school in Detroit. When I learned of plans by certain radical elements to attack American civilian targets, I could not stand by and do nothing. This revelation hit Maria like a physical blow. Ahmad wasn't just offering intelligence as a matter of political convenience, he had personal stakes in preventing terrorist attacks on American soil. His own children were potential targets of the very plots he was trying to help prevent. What can you tell me about these planned attacks? Maria asked, pulling out a small digital recorder. And what do you need in return for this information? Ahmad gestured for her to sit on one of the blankets spread around the camp stove, a traditional gesture of hospitality that also moved her further away from the cave entrance. Maria hesitated, knowing that the SEALs outside would lose visual contact with her if she moved deeper into the cave. I must have your word that this information will be acted upon quickly, Ahmad said seriously. The attacks are planned for the American holiday you call Thanksgiving. That gives your authorities less than 6 weeks to identify and stop the plotters. The timeline sent chills down Maria's spine. Thanksgiving was one of the busiest travel periods of the year in America, with millions of people gathering with family and friends. It would be an ideal time for terrorists to maximize casualties and psychological impact. Outside the cave, Maria could hear the faint sound of radio chatter as the SEAL team leader continued his increasingly tense communications with various command centers. She realized that her 5-minute deadline was probably approaching, and she needed to either produce results or face the possibility that the SEALs would proceed with their assault. Ahmad, she said urgently, I need you to understand something. The American soldiers outside have orders to eliminate everyone in this cave. They believe you're planning attacks, not trying to prevent them. If I can't convince them otherwise in the next few minutes, this conversation is going to end with all of us dead. Ahmad's companion shifted nervously and spoke rapidly in Pashto. Maria could hear the concern in their voices and could see them looking toward what she assumed were their weapons stashed elsewhere in the cave. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge, and any sudden movement or misunderstanding could trigger a firefight that would end all their lives. What do you propose? Ahmad asked, his voice remaining calm despite the gravity of the situation. I propose that you and one of your men come outside with me, Maria said, knowing that she was asking them to take an enormous risk. Face to face, with American soldiers, and explain who you are and why you're here. It's the only way to convince them that you're not a threat. Ahmad considered this proposal while his companions argued quietly in their native language. From their tone and gestures, it was clear that they thought Maria's suggestion was suicidal. Walking out of a defensive position to confront heavily armed American special forces was not a decision to be made lightly. "And if your soldiers decide to shoot us as we exit the cave?" Ahmad asked practically. "Then, we all die together," Maria replied honestly. "But, if we stay here and do nothing, the result will be the same. At least this way, there's a chance that cooler heads will prevail and we can prevent the terrorist attacks you're warning us about." The sound of movement from outside the cave suggested that the SEALs were preparing for action. Maria's time was running out, and she needed Ahmad to make a decision quickly or risk losing everything they had worked toward. "There's something else," Ahmad said, reaching into his jacket pocket in a movement that made Maria tense reflexively. He pulled out a small flash drive and held it up for her to see. "The names of the plotters, their planned targets, their financial networks, everything is on this device. I have been collecting this information for months, waiting for an opportunity to share it with American intelligence." Maria stared at the flash drive, realizing that she was looking at information that could potentially save hundreds or thousands of American lives. But that information would be useless if Ahmad was killed in the next few minutes by American forces who didn't understand the true situation. "Will you trust me?" Maria asked, extending her hand toward the flash drive. "Give me that information, and then come outside with me to face the soldiers. Together, we can make them understand what's really happening here." Ahmad looked at the flash drive in his hand, then at Maria's face, weighing a decision that would determine not only his own fate but potentially the safety of countless innocent people in America. What he decided in the next few seconds would either represent a breakthrough in counterterrorism cooperation or the tragic end of an opportunity to prevent mass casualty attacks. The sound of boots on stone from outside the cave indicated that the SEALs were moving closer to the entrance. Time had run out, and Ahmad needed to make his choice: trust an American intelligence officer he had just met, or retreat deeper into the cave and prepare for a battle that could only end in his death. The flash drive seemed to glow in the dim light of the cave as Ahmad held it suspended between offering it to Maria or putting it back in his pocket. Everything that happened next would depend on whether a former Taliban commander could find the courage to trust an unarmed American woman with his life and the lives of his countrymen. Ahmad placed the flash drive in Maria's palm, his withered fingers briefly touching hers in a gesture that transcended the barriers of nationality, religion, and military conflict. "For my sons in America," he said quietly, "and for all the innocents who should not pay the price for madmen's hatred." Maria carefully secured the device in a zippered pocket of her tactical vest, knowing that she now carried information that could reshape the global war on terror. But possessing the intelligence was only half the battle. She still needed to get all of them out of this situation alive so the information could be acted upon. "Time's up, Staff Sergeant," came the voice of the SEAL team leader from outside the cave. "I need you to exit that position immediately. We're beginning our approach." Maria could hear the distinctive sounds of the SEAL team moving into assault positions. Within moments, they would storm the cave with overwhelming force, and no amount of explanation would prevent casualties once the shooting started. "Ahmad, we need to move now," Maria said urgently. "Walk beside me, keep your hands visible, and let me do the talking until they understand the situation." Ahmad spoke rapidly to his two companions, giving them instructions in Pashto. Maria caught enough words to understand that he was telling them to remain in the cave and keep their weapons secured unless shooting began outside. These men had survived decades of warfare, and they understood the tactical realities of their situation. As Maria and Ahmad approached the cave entrance together, the bright mountain sunlight was almost blinding after the dim interior. Maria kept her hands raised high and called out clearly to the SEALs before they became visible. "This is Staff Sergeant Santos. I'm exiting the cave with one of the intelligence contacts. He is unarmed and cooperative. Hold your fire and prepare for verification of his identity." The response was immediate and professional. "Staff Sergeant, have your contact stop at the cave entrance with hands visible. You continue forward to our position for debriefing." Maria turned to Ahmad, whose face showed the strain of a man walking toward what could easily be his death. "Remember," she said quietly, "they're soldiers like you once were. Show them the respect that one warrior gives to another, and they'll respond in kind." Ahmad nodded, understanding the psychology involved. Despite the cultural and political differences, professional soldiers shared certain common values and codes of conduct that transcended national boundaries. As they emerged from the cave, Maria could see all 5 SEALs in covered positions with clear fields of fire. Their weapons were trained on Ahmad, but their discipline was evident in the way they held their fire despite their obvious readiness to engage if necessary. "Sir," Maria called out to the team leader, "this is Khalil Ahmad, former Afghan National Army colonel, currently providing intelligence on planned terrorist attacks against American civilian targets. He has information that could prevent mass casualty events scheduled for the Thanksgiving holiday period." The team leader listened to his earpiece for several moments, apparently receiving updated instructions from his command center. The political and military implications of the situation had clearly reached the highest levels of the military command structure. Ahmad stood motionless at the cave entrance, his arms extended and his face showing the dignity of a man who had chosen to risk his life for principles that transcended personal safety. Maria realized that she was witnessing a moment of profound moral courage, a former enemy combatant choosing to trust his life to American forces in order to protect American civilians. "Colonel Ahmad," the team leader called out, using the military rank as a sign of professional respect, "I'm going to need you to answer some questions to verify your identity and intentions." "I am ready," Ahmad replied in clear English, his voice carrying across the mountainside with the calm authority of a man who had commanded troops in battle. What followed was an impromptu interrogation that demonstrated the professionalism of both sides. The SEAL team leader asked specific questions about Ahmad's military service, his knowledge of Taliban operations, and his motivations for seeking contact with American intelligence. Ahmad answered each question directly and completely, providing details that could be verified through military databases and intelligence files. Meanwhile, Maria could hear increased radio chatter as various command centers worked frantically to confirm Ahmad's story and coordinate a response to the intelligence he was providing. The flash drive in her pocket seemed to weigh 10 pounds as she realized that she was carrying information that could reshape counter-terrorism operations across multiple agencies and countries. After nearly 20 minutes of questioning, the team leader received what was apparently the final word from his superiors. His entire demeanor changed as he lowered his weapon and spoke into his throat microphone. "Command, this is Neptune 6. Identity confirmed on intelligence asset. Mission parameters are changing to support and protection rather than elimination. Requesting immediate extraction for high-value intelligence transfer." The relief that washed over the mountainside was almost tangible. 5 Navy SEALs relaxed their tactical posture while maintaining professional vigilance. Ahmad allowed his arms to lower for the first time in half an hour, and Maria felt the crushing weight of responsibility begin to shift to the proper authorities. The 2 Afghan fighters emerged from the cave at Ahmad's call, moving slowly and keeping their hands visible. They were older men with the bearing of experienced soldiers, and Maria could see the mutual recognition that passed between them and the American SEALs. Whatever their political differences, these were all professional warriors who understood and respected each other's skills and dedication. Within an hour, helicopters arrived to extract both the SEAL team and the intelligence assets. The flight back to the main base was conducted in relative silence, with each person processing the implications of what had just occurred. Maria spent the time reviewing her notes and preparing for the extensive debriefing sessions that would follow. The intelligence on Ahmad's flash drive proved to be even more valuable than anyone had anticipated. It contained detailed information about a network of terrorist cells planning coordinated attacks on American shopping centers, transportation hubs, and sporting events during the Thanksgiving weekend. The information led to arrests in 6 states and prevented what could have been the deadliest terrorist attack on American soil since September 11. Ahmad and his associates were relocated to safe houses and eventually resettled in the United States under new identities. His 3 sons were able to continue their education and eventually became American citizens, contributing to the society their father had helped protect. The coordination failure that had nearly resulted in disaster led to significant changes in how intelligence operations were planned and executed. New protocols were established to ensure that different military units operating in the same area were aware of each other's missions and objectives. Maria Santos received the Defense Intelligence Agency's highest decoration for her actions that day, though the details of her citation remained classified for national security reasons. More importantly, she had proven that sometimes the most effective weapon an intelligence officer could wield was the courage to stand between opposing forces and find a path toward mutual understanding. The 5 Navy SEALs requested and received permission to attend the award ceremony, an unprecedented gesture of respect from one of the military's most elite units. Their team leader later described the incident as a reminder that the most complex military operations often required not just tactical skill, but the wisdom to recognize when shooting was not the answer. Years later, when Maria had been promoted to major and was training new intelligence officers, she would tell them about the day she faced 5 Navy SEALs without a rifle and learned that sometimes the most important battles were won not through superior firepower, but through the courage to trust in the better angels of human nature. The mountains of Afghanistan had witnessed countless conflicts over the centuries, but on that particular day, they had also witnessed something rarer and more precious, a moment when enemies chose to become allies in service of protecting innocent lives. It was a reminder that even in the darkest chapters of human conflict, there remained the possibility for understanding, cooperation, and hope.